suicide is the most desperate, permanent solution to what often are temporary worries, which could be solved through talking and could be resolved. We met at Cambridge, where we read history, and Rose was extremely intelligent, very well read, very good judge of art and pictures. She worked for Sotheby's, and then actually she was the northern correspondent of the Daily Telegraph for a bit. And then she worked for me for quite a long time while our 3 children grew up. So we got 2 sons and a daughter who are now in their early 30s. And then she had her own career, which was really taking off. She was a very, very good judge of horses. She rode beautifully. She had lovely hands. She rode very well, always been interested in horses. Before she went to Cambridge, she'd worked as a stable lad in Gavin Pritchard Gordon's yard at Newmarket. And we always had horses here. She was a director of Aintree Racecourse for some time, and then she was made the chairman. And sadly, that's all been thrown away. So her career was really blossoming late in life. She was really taking off, and she was going to do some real good. It was always pretty unsatisfactory when I was in London, or she was nearly always busy. So we'd have brief calls, and it wasn't out of the ordinary that I'd ring in the morning, and either I'd be quite brief, she'd be busy, or I'd be busy, or whatever. And she didn't answer. I didn't think much of it. I rang, I think, 2 or 3 times, left a voicemail, sent her a text, said, I'm around for lunch, give us a buzz. Didn't think it was anything particularly out of the ordinary when she was busy. Then in the evening, I thought that was odd. I rang again, there was no answer, because she was very efficient and would come in the evening. She was a great gardener as well, so we've had this big project restoring a wood, and the most extraordinary aspects was leaving it in June, and now it's looking completely wonderful, all the things we planted. So she'd often be down the wood, another reason why she wouldn't answer, because the phone doesn't work there. She might be strimming or planting or whatever. My second son had been here, hadn't seen her all day, and he was getting worried. So he began a search with some kind neighbours. And by, I think, about 8:15, it was obvious we had a real nightmare unfolding. So I rang the Met from my office in the Commons and told them formally that she was missing. And the police are incredibly efficient. They go on to West Mercia, who put on a major operation here. And were marvellous. And I then got hold of my elder son, who'd also been making calls, and there was quite an extensive search going on with more and more neighbours involved. And we drove up, and we were on the phone to Ned, my second son, nearly the whole way, with suggestions. And we went through medical nightmares, heart attack, stroke, sort of respiratory seizure, but we never considered what had actually happened. It just was not, after 3.5 hours drive, we never once considered it. So I then got out, there's a lot of police here and big operation, and the head of the operation came up to me and looked me straight in the eye and said, Mr. Paterson, does your wife suffer from depression? And I was actually a bit put out. I thought, all these police, this huge operation, what are they doing? They're talking about depression. Let's get out there. And I said, I was slightly irritated. I said, look, she's been out all day somewhere. It's been a very hot June day. Should be dehydrating? Certainly not, no. And we'd never, ever dreamt of what the reality was. And of course he knew, sadly, he knew exactly what he was looking for. So they found her in the early hours of the morning, I think probably looking back about 3 o'clock. And I insisted on seeing her, and went down probably after they'd done all the necessary photographs and all the procedures had been carried out. And I just wanted to see what the scene was like, and there was no question, there was no one else involved at all. It was all very quiet and calm, and there was no damage to any undergrowth or anything. So this was completely out of the blue, and we'd been married for 40 years. And we'd never had a hint of this. We knew there were pressures on her, so it was a big blow that the National was cancelled. She had worries about me in my political life. There were various pressures on me, but we were totally unprepared for this. We had had no hint of this whatever. So my lesson to everybody watching this is please talk. I say this the whole time. Please talk to people. If you see anyone who's looking worried or anxious, please talk to them, because behind it there could be something much, much more serious. We knew she was anxious about this stuff, and she would talk about it a bit, but we had no idea of the depth of the anxiety. And the most tragic figure in all this, okay, we're all very traumatised and damaged the rest of our lives, but her life's ended. And she's easily the biggest victim of this whole thing. And if only she had mentioned it, you know, we would have changed everything. She has completely changed everything by doing this. But much more importantly, we got to talk this through. And so bottling it up and the sort of British stiff upper lip is not the way to go on this. It's really important that people talk, and both sides. So the message I've got is, if you're feeling anxious, talk to your close family, talk to your cousins or aunts if necessary, talk to a doctor, talk to a nurse, talk to someone you trust, but don't bottle it up, because the damage is absolutely catastrophic. First for you, because anyone who does this, obviously, often under sort of temporary pressures. There's this very good expression which I got from someone I know quite well who very nearly killed himself. And he says, like a snake bite, you just get this driven urge. You think this is the way to improve everyone else's life, and it's the natural thing you should do to end your life. And another expression is like a mental health heart attack, which is a very good expression. So there's this terrible surge to bring what is often possibly just a temporary anxiety to an end, but it's the most desperate, permanent end. It may sound idiotic to say that, but it is completely permanent. You know, suicide is the most desperate, permanent solution to what often are temporary worries, which could be solved through talking and could be resolved. From my immediate experience and having talked to others, many people who have tried don't repeat it and actually feel really quite ashamed of themselves and really shocked. And of course, having done it, a lot of family rally round, and that would indicate to me that it's possibly a temporary problem. So the guy who talked about the snake bite, he is absolutely mortified with what he tried to do and will definitely not do it again. In the next 4 minutes, someone will attempt to kill themselves. In the next 90 minutes, someone will succeed. So very crudely, about only 1 in 20, 25 attempts succeed. So those 19 or 24 people, whatever it is, they have time to reflect on what they very nearly did. And they look into this terrible black hole and see the horror that they nearly brought about. And many of them don't try again. Sadly, some do. And of course, those are the ones that really, really need help. But I have talked to people who have tried, and they are absolutely clear they won't do it again. So it seems to me, and this may be a generalisation, but in many cases it might be just seeking a terrible permanent solution to what is actually only a temporary problem. Well, we'd both had COVID in March. I was really clobbered by it and was in bed, and I mean, such a extent I'm not even sure whether she did go to bed, because I was absolutely wiped out by it. And there is some research which I've seen from Italy that shows that women are disproportionately not impacted clinically. So fewer women get really ill, fewer women end up going to hospital, thankfully don't die. But they are impacted neurologically. So there may be a COVID element in this, which we have not established. As I said, she was worried about the future of the National. That was a big blow that the National's cancelled. And there was stuff in my political life she was worried about. And then, and we have to be very careful to talk about this in public, but there are these very dangerous websites. And the narrative is very beguiling and seductive, which is that all lives have a positive, constructive phase, and it's completely normal for a life to plateau and ultimately to look negative with no further prospect of anything worthwhile being achieved. So it's a completely normal, natural event to consider ending that life. It's estimated that 135 people, one quite good study, are very seriously impacted by a suicide. Well, in Rosie's case, I think that's a massive underestimate. So that's the thick end of 900,000 to 1 million people seriously affected by suicide. And they are seriously traumatized. So it's the biggest cause of death in people under 35. So I'm really, really motivated to try, do what I can to bring attention to this issue, and obviously to try and help at national level. So I do think there has to be a really concerted effort to wake people up to the huge problem of suicide and to get people talking. And one of the things I'm very keen on is suicide awareness training. So if you look at the big NHS trust in Liverpool, they took over mental health at Liverpool Prison, and they have markedly reduced suicide. I mean, quite statistically, it's very, very clear that their techniques have worked. So in their own trust, this guy Joe Rafferty runs it. I think he did a poll of his staff, and it's a huge NHS trust. I think something like 80% thought that once someone had decided to end their life by suicide, 80% thought nothing could be done. After they'd done the suicide awareness training, which doesn't take very long, 10% did. So it just made them aware. So I'm very clear that in my case, every MP, every member of MP's staff, in the political world, every editor, emphatically every journalist should be doing this. Every doctor, every nurse, every head teacher, every school teacher, every head of a big company, every head of a trades union, and cascade it down through every charity you can think of. I mean, everybody should be doing more suicide awareness training. It doesn't take very long. It just wakes you up. Oh, hugely. I mean, you're right. I was totally knocked by it immediately, and there was a huge amount to be done, all the ghastly admin stuff when someone dies, but there's something extra about suicide, which is the fact that it's inexplicable. So it's completely appalling. There'll be readers here who've lost parents or children or close relations or friends from cancer or heart attacks or car crash or drowning. And I'd be very careful what I say, because it's completely shattering for them, and they'll be grieving and miserable for the rest of their lives. But there is this terrible extra dimension to suicide. You just wonder why. And the two terribly simple questions: why didn't we notice, and why didn't she tell us? And you just churn and churn and churn. I don't think there's an obvious moment when we missed it. I think there might be occasions, and obviously I've learnt, talking to a lot of other people, there have been some terrible misses where a young man told his doctor and the doctor didn't react quick enough or whatever, or gave the wrong advice. I have been told anecdotally some really bad cases. So I don't think there was any very obvious miss. And we had this plan. The notes for the Aintree meeting are on the desk there. The shopping list for my birthday party, dinner, and it's still on her phone, is the Eurostar ticket. And the huge fuss, which I have said out publicly also, is the huge fuss about the Eurostar ticket, where she thought I was not capable of looking after myself for more than one weekend alone. And there's a huge fuss about getting back in time. So all this planning, and I met, obviously we haven't, a lot of people because of lockdown we haven't talked. I met a close friend of hers and ours last weekend, and she had a whole lot of texts about meeting Rose the week she got back. So she was stunned by it too. Every life has hope. So the very first thing every every suicide is completely and totally unnecessary. And emphatically, every suicide creates huge problems and solves none. It's really important to get that across. Suicides cause an appalling succession of increasing disasters around them. So it's like pulling a suicide vest. You don't just blow up the people closest to you. You have huge, Rose has had a huge impact across a whole range of people. So suicides cause massive, grotesque problems, totally out of proportion often to the possible anxiety that originally caused it. And obviously the biggest victim of all by far is the person who ends their life. So emphatically, do not take this terrible, permanent, irreversible step which does such damage, first of all to yourself, but then to so many around you. All the issues and the anxieties are ultimately solvable. There is nothing that is solved by suicide, absolutely nothing. A lot of people find it very, very hard to talk about it. And they use euphemisms, which in my case annoy me. So when people walk up to me and say, "I'm so sorry your wife's passed away," I come straight back and say, "She didn't pass away, she hanged herself." People try to sort of skate past the horror of what's happened. And I think it's much better to face up to it. And I have a small number of friends, some of them in politics, some of them old family friends, who are marvellous. And they sort of stuck with me and they've rung me up. And it's not easy for them, I know. And a couple of them that will ring me up on Sunday nights. And they must grit themselves because they know what I'm going to say is going to be grim and miserable. So I think that would be my advice, was don't just bottle it up. I have a small number of friends, some of them in politics, some of them old family friends, who are marvellous. And they sort of stuck with me and they've rung me up. And it's not easy for them, I know. And a couple of them that will ring me up on Sunday nights. And they must grit themselves because they know what I'm going to say is going to be grim and miserable. So I think that would be my advice, was don't just bottle it up. And do try to carry on. So, but it does help to have a small number of friends or relatives who you can talk to. I mean, I think the whole message of it, before and after suicide, is talk. Just keep talking. There is real merit in it. And share it. And there are wonderful charities. These charities do tremendous work. Samaritan's Mind, Paterson, and others. Zero Suicide Alliance, set up by this guy Joe Rafferty, who runs the big Mosaic Trust. They've done wonderful work. So if you're worried, talk to them. The absolute lesson, if you're really miserable, is don't bottle it up, because there is also sadly a record of suicides having a knock-on effect. Well, that's what we felt very strongly when we began. So my views have sort of morphed on this. I felt terribly clearly through sort of December, January, when we began. Well, I first had the idea of setting up the trust, that if only she'd known of the catastrophic damage she's done, obviously first of all to herself, but to all of us and then to the wider world around her, she wouldn't have done it. So I did begin these very public statements, basically to wake people up to the damage. But I think we probably slightly morphed from that because we've picked up this concept of the intensity of the snake bite and the intensity of the sort of mental heart attack. Oh, one of the things that really winds me up when people say, "Oh, don't beat yourself up." Well, of course I beat myself up the whole time. Because it is really odd I didn't. If you think of it, if she was feeling that unhappy, how on earth did I not notice? Married to someone for 40 years. Very hard to understand that. And that's something that's very hard to take on board. I think they find it very difficult. You know, they're in their 30s or very late 20s or prime of life, just getting married. This is a terrible blow to them. And I think the danger, me talking like this, they want her to be remembered for all the things she did, because she was a very remarkable person and touched a lot of people. I can't think of a single person who didn't like her, who was rude about her, ever. It's quite a record. So she was very, very popular against this huge world. She was in the political world with me, the charity world, the arts world, the world of racing. You know, she touched an awful lot of people, and they want her, quite rightly, to be remembered for that. But there is this terrible, terrible thing she did, and I also think it is worth us trying to get some good out of it. So if we can stop just one family going through what we're going through in her name, that is another way of carrying on her name, and I hope she'd be proud of it. So we've set up a charity called the Rose Paterson Trust. We launched it at the National, and the Jockey Club and Aintree were marvellous, giving us a platform, and very kind. And then I had a cardboard box here for most of the last year, full of letters, because I got an absolute deluge of letters and emails from people who very kindly wrote. So we wrote back to them, thanking them for writing and saying that we had set up this trust, and with the 3 pillars: so suicide prevention, stroke suicide bereavement, but mainly prevention, 2, research, and 3, trying to influence national politics. And we've had a tremendous reaction. People have been incredibly generous, been really astonished. And we're still really in the money raising phase while Rose's memory is still alive, because obviously, sadly, her memory will fade away, and it'll be harder to raise money. But at the moment, it's still quite a recent event, and I think we might as well concentrate on raising money for the next few months, and then we'll start looking actively for suitable projects in areas where we hope we might find areas where there hasn't been so much work concentrated. It's very important we don't duplicate good work done by other charities. And it's been very much a family effort. I mean, I thought of it, there's no point in going public and explaining to everyone how terrible this is if we're not actually trying to do something. And I think it also gives me sort of skin in the game, talking to the government, that we are actually trying to do something and trying to help. And currently we're raising money, which we hope to find suitable outlets for, which will be projects or smaller charities working on suicide prevention. So there are people like Samaritans in Mind, who are Paterson and others, but who do wonderful work. But thankfully they're well established and they're well funded. But I think we think there are probably quite a lot of smaller charities which have had a difficult time through the lockdown. So I think we'll probably be concentrating on them. And then we think we might do some research. So my children are very interested in female suicide because, for obvious reasons, 3/4 of suicides are male, but there are terrible pressures from internet, especially on younger women. So we might look to see if there's something we could help there. And we're very keen we don't duplicate anything, obviously, and also we don't tread on toes. But this is such a big area, there might be something to help there. And then lastly, the other platform is basically using my role as a national politician. So I mentioned that the online safety bill. I've not just talked to ministers from the Secretary of State down, but we've set up this round table with, as I said, people like Alistair Campbell on it to help advise the government. Caroline Diney has been very, very open to this, to get our ideas. We've got another one coming up in a couple of weeks' time, see how we can improve, help, amend, whatever, the online safety bill. And there'll be more, obviously, I think, on suicide at national policy level down the road. Because I repeat, this is a huge problem. It's the biggest cause of death in people under 35. If we wiped out 15 jumbo jets a year, you would close down the whole of the Department of Transport. You would close down every airplane manufacturer, aero engine manufacturer, they'd all be shut until you sorted this problem out. I've had a number of emails. I wouldn't like to exaggerate a huge number, but I've had a number, a number which might be significant. I think for the people to send them, it's quite a brave move and quite difficult, from people who have said they were in a very difficult position, or a close relative had died and they couldn't see how they could carry on living. But having seen and heard or read what we've been putting out, they've had second thoughts and decided they are definitely going to make a go and not take any terrible step. So we get that. I mean, it's what we're trying to do. And if a small number of people send us a message like that, perhaps a rather large number have also been impacted beneficially and haven't got in touch with us. And that in a small, it does make it worthwhile what we're doing.